Whether you're just starting out in filmmaking or you've been doing this for a while, there are a few non-negotiable things you cannot go without if you want professional looking videos. And today we're going to be talking about the absolute must-haves, from camera choices to settings, audio gear, and even music licensing. Things that will set you apart from the amateurs. And I'm not going to just tell you what to do. I'll try to show you mistakes to avoid so your videos actually look cinematic. But enough talking. Let's get into it. First topic to tackle is cameras. Which one is better and which one is more affordable? In today's filmmaking industry, there are so many choices to choose from, and they have gotten so good at compacting all of this quality into such small cameras. Whether DSLR, mirrorless, or even a phone, they all have their pros and cons, but they will get the job done. Now, some beginner options that you could look into that won't break the bank are the Sony CVE-10 is a camera that I personally once had, and it is amazing for the price point. It is a crop sensor, so a lot of the lenses will be a lot more affordable, and the quality is great. There's also the Canon R50, and if you just simply don't have a budget for a camera, use your phone. The biggest mistake that beginning filmmakers think is they have to go out and buy the most expensive camera. I know, because I was one of them. I thought the only way for me to get into filmmaking was by buying the most expensive camera, and that led me to not create at all. Waiting for the moment when I had the finances to be able to invest when I already had a camera in my pocket. In today's day and age, phones have become the #1 tool for content creation. I've even seen pro-level filmmakers using phones to showcase that tools will never be a limitation if you want to be a filmmaker. Choose a camera that's based on your needs and what resolves the problem now. Don't just chase the hype. But for those who don't have a budget and say, Lewis, what is the best camera I could use to start? Some options are the Sony a7S III, which is also the same exact sensor that is in the FX3, a camera that I personally used on my first independent film. This camera is classified by Sony as a entry-level cinema camera, giving you options like 422 and 10-bit, which gives you the most flexibility in post-editing when color grading. And also cameras like the Canon R5. These are all full-frame cinematic cameras that will allow you to unlock the fullest creativity possible. And the list does go on, but these are just the basics to get into filmmaking. And now that we got cameras out of the way, the next question is, what are the best settings? Well, the next things to focus on are resolution and frame rate. So one thing to keep in mind when you are filming is to make sure that your camera is at its highest resolution. Normally that's 4K, but if for some odd reason your camera or phone does not allow you to film at 4K, you want to drop that down to at least HD, which is 1080. 1920 by 1080, that is the resolution. Because a majority of the content that we do create normally goes onto social media platforms and gets compressed. So filming in HD, although you will lose a little bit of resolution, is still perfectly fine for all social media platforms. Now let's dive into frames per second, or FPS. What should I film at? Right now we're filming at 24 frames per second, which gives you that cinematic feel, which is what we're accustomed to seeing in movies. There are other frame rates like 60 FPS or 30 FPS, and it's become an industry standard for social media. So let's look at the difference between 24 and 60 and 30. This is what 24 frames per second looks like. Well, 24 frames per second is the normal standard for cinematic content. It's what our eyes are accustomed to seeing in all of these Hollywood picture movies. But 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second is what we've gotten accustomed when posting on social media platforms. This also gives you the option to slow down your footage if you ever want slow motion. And this is what 60 frames per second looks like. All right, so this is what 30 frames per second looks like. This is normally what I film all of my social media shorts, whether it be reels, so on and so forth. And it gives you the same feel as a 60, but in 60 you just get more frames. But following frames per second, or FPS, is your shutter speed. Alright, now we're going to talk about shutter speed and what your shutter speed should be at depending on what frames per second you're filming at. So right now at 24 frames per second, this is a natural look with the shutter speed being 1/50 towards a 24 frames per second, and it looks normal. This is what our eyes normally see. It has the normal motion blur, which is, you know, as you move and capture motion in the footage, it's what our eyes are naturally accustomed to seeing. Now, if we were to change that, So this is a cranked up shutter speed. You could utilize this for like action. Like if you're shooting an action film, it just makes the video look a lot faster than what it normally is. So as you see, like the motion blur doesn't look proper. So that's what that is all about. All right, so here we have a shutter speed that is not correspondent. It is not double the frame rate. All right, now here you have 60 frames per second and you're filming at the proper shutter speed, which shows you it seems more of like a soap opera or like a TV show. So it's very, very, very super smooth. And here we're at a shutter speed that is at 60 frames per second, and the same thing goes. It's not proper motion blur. Like it doesn't look natural to the eye. It almost looks like a dream, or like a someone that's intoxicated or under the influence of something. So that's what that does. This is a rule for getting the proper motion blur that our eyes are already accustomed to. When filming at 24 frames per second, you should always stay at 1/50, which is double the frame rate of what you filmed at. If you filmed at 60 frames per second, you should have your shutter speed at 1/120. Now, there are certain moments where you can break this rule to get a more creative look. And for that, you could watch this video right here. Next thing you want to focus on is ISO and exposure. You always want to keep your ISO as low as possible, but never under the native ISO. This will ensure to get the cleanest image out of your camera without all of that noise. So not having the proper exposure can look like this. Your highlights are completely gone. There is no detail whatsoever. Like my hands, there's no detail on my hands. My face, like a majority of my face just looks gone. If you look at the house behind me, the fence, everything is completely blown out. And this is what not having the proper ISO setting can cause to your image. Next thing to focus on is your white balance. Never use auto white balance. Lock it to match your environment by watching your Kelvin. If it's a sunny day, you want to keep that number closer to 6,400. If it's overcast, you want to bring that number down to about 3,800. But keep adjusting those numbers until it looks proper to you. So this is an improper white balance, and I know I exaggerated, but it's to show you an example of what it is to not have the right white balance. This is what it can look like, and maybe some of your shots have been looking this way, either too green or too blue or too yellow. Now, on the other hand, this is also incorrect because you're telling your scene it is way too sunny, like this is what we're adjusting to, and you've gone completely yellow with your white balance. Let's say it's a super bright sunny day, you have to adjust your Kelvin according to that. Never, never, never use auto white balance. I know a lot of people do, and what happens is when you are color grading in post, that is going to be the biggest headache because you're going to have a color grading that's going to start at a certain Kelvin, and then you're going to switch over to another location, and it's going to be a complete different color grade. You're going to have to adjust everything that you did. So never shoot auto white balance. Normally, when you are in a very like overcasted or not too much sunlight, you want to set your Kelvin at around like 3,800, 3,900, up to maybe like 4,000. And then if it's too sunny, normally it's around like 6,400 to like 5,400. And those are just, numbers that you are going to want to play around with. This is not a one size fits all. You want to make sure that you properly fix that. The next thing to focus on is your picture profile. Always make sure to film in the flattest image possible. If your camera allows, always film in log. This will allow you to get the most dynamic range and also the most control in post-production. If you want to be able to color grade like the pros, if you want to be able to get the best color out of your scene or your camera, you want to film in log. Well, what is log? Log is the flattest image that your camera produces, but keep in mind, I promise you, I know it was super, super difficult for me to understand this when I first got into filmmaking, but this is all trial and error. So it's going to look horrible on your screen. It's going to look like, oh my gosh, Louis, this just doesn't look right. But filming in log is what's going to allow you to get all of those colors and be able to tweak them to the way that you would like. In conclusion, to camera settings, try to always stay away from auto settings and keep everything as manual as you can. Now let's dive into audio and why this may be more important than the actual visuals. Audio is going to be either a deal breaker or something that's going to help you so much. Because yes, it is great to have the best camera settings, the best lenses, the best cameras, all of that. It's all great. But at the end of the day, you can have the most amazing footage coming out of your camera, your color grading, and the colors look spectacular. But if the audio that's coming out of there is horrible and not understandable to your audience, that can also take your audience's attention completely away from the video that you're trying to produce. A great example of that is, have you ever been on either Netflix or Prime Video watching a video and you see that the quality of the video actually goes down before the audio actually goes down? That is because they understand that audio is one of the major components that will allow for your video to stand out. So this is a test of the audio coming from our wireless microphones and that same exact audio coming directly from the camera. Can you tell the difference? How bad is the audio? This is the camera's audio. We are outdoors, so there's probably a bunch of echoes. You can hear everything around, either birds chirping, whatever. And now we're going directly to the microphone in here. We've completely silenced everything around. You could just hear my voice and it just brings you in. It takes all the distractions away from audio. And this is just to use an example. Have you ever been studying something and if there's too much distraction as far as audio goes, you can't focus because your attention goes to whatever else is making noise in the background? That's exactly how audio works in video. You want to make sure that your distractions are completely gone from your audience. So things to keep in mind is never use the internal recording of your camera. Always use external microphones like wireless microphones, lavalier microphones, or shotgun microphones like I am currently using right now. There are many budget-friendly microphones out there that will help you execute getting the best audio to pair with great visuals. The Rode Wireless Go-To is best for convenience. The Yeti D4 Mini or the Boya M1 Lav mic. And those are going to be the cheapest, but they're solid quality. Now, this one final tip completely gets overlooked sometimes by filmmakers, but it is essential to bringing emotion to your scene. And that is background music. Music matters because it drives emotion and keeps your audience engaged. It helps give more meaning to the story that you're already telling. It's kind of like the icing on the cake. The cake may be good, but the icing brings it home. And I know what you're thinking. Louis, I'll just grab some music from online, slap it on my video, and call it finished. No. Licensing matters, and if the music you're using is not licensed, you could be vulnerable for copyright. So what's the solution? Well, you can go down the paid route with licensing companies like Artlist, Epidemic Sound, and so on and so forth. But if you're just starting out and you don't have the finances to go down the paid route, there are some free versions. I know, I gotcha. YouTube Audio Library actually has a good selection to go off of. It may not be the best route, but if you're starting, it gets the job done. I actually started using this myself before I could go down the paid route. So remember, always use royalty-free music. And those are the absolute non-negotiables for filmmaking. No matter if you're a beginner or a pro, if you skip these, your videos will suffer. But if you apply them, you'll instantly level up your work. Let me know in the comments what gear you're using right now, and if you need any recommendations, I got you. Make sure to like and subscribe for more filmmaking tips, and I'll catch you on the next one. I hope this helps. I hope.